Open Market is sponsored by AdLib, the self-serve DSP solution making advertising easy. What do the world's largest demand-side platforms have in common? They're effective, but they require large annual contracts and spend minimums. With AdLib, growing agencies get a single platform that connects to every top global DSP with no contracts, no spend minimums, and G2's #1 ranked support. That means access to the entire universe of TV, digital out-of-home, audio, display, video, and native without a hassle and with no blind spots. It's incredibly easy to use, plus it can automate most of the work your team spends hours a day doing manually. Get the most powerful media buying technology without the barriers to entry. Check out AdLib at getadlib.com today.
Welcome to Open Market, a podcast about building companies in the advertising industry. I'm Joe Zappa, and I'm joined by the illustrious Eric Franchi. What's up, Eric?
How you doing, Joe? I like illustrious. It's a good word.
Yeah, well, you're our only illustrious guest this week. We've been funneling in some other illustrious people, but today you shine alone.
Oh, God. You kill me. This is the last pod of the summer, Joe. Where'd the summer go?
I know. I guess that's true. You know, I hadn't even grokked that. But the U.S. Open is happening as we're recording this, and that's always a very nice end to the summer for me. Are you a tennis fan at all?
No.
Sad. Yeah. Oh, I remember this because I tried. I was like, Eric, you're a man. You like sports, and you were like, nope, I hate them. I don't like them at all.
Anyway, what's the topic for today, Joe?
Today, we're talking about the common traits of your 3 most successful investments. So we have a lot of builders who listen to the show who I think will be very interested in this. You know, we're essentially trying to get at what makes venture-backed companies or companies in general in this space successful. And so I wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah. When you teed that up, like what are the traits that make me a successful venture capitalist? You know, I really thought about it. You know, and I started thinking about what makes me different from my peers in venture capital. A few things came to mind. Number one, I don't think any of them even lift. So I think that's a key trait. Number two, I've never seen any of them on the jiu-jitsu mat. I think that's another important
I was about to hit that. I was gonna say, and they couldn't wrestle anyone to the ground.
No. I can go on. But I think those are the few things that came to mind. So this has been a great pod, Joe.
Have you ever engaged your partner, Joe Zawadzki, in a Brazilian jiu-jitsu match? How do you think he would fare? He has a size advantage.
He's a big dude, but I don't think he's been instructed on how to use the size. So I think probably pretty quick match. Yeah, pretty quick.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, we'll do that for charity one day.
Right.
Okay, so are there any like big picture things? I know you said, you have many children, and so you don't want to be seen to be picking any favorites and upset anyone. So any other caveats you want to hit before we jump into the 3 examples?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so let's define success. Success is, from an investment perspective, is these companies have grown disproportionately higher in value over time. And what I mean by over time is, we did the episode about how to, optimize for a 12 or 18 month exit. That's not the norm for successful companies. Successful companies are successful because they're successful over 7, 8, 10 years. So these are companies we've been in for a long time to allow for that compounded growth. So that's the reason why I think the examples that, we have today are going to be the examples that we talk about. And, who's to say that, some of our more recent investments won't be the greatest of all time. It just, these come to mind because we've been in them for a long enough time. I'm going to maintain confidentiality around financials, returns, everything like that. It's a little bit more about the traits and the stories. So that's the only caveats.
Okay, sounds good to me. Yeah, I won't hold your feet to the fire on any proof. I'll just take your word for it. So the first one you wanted to talk about is a company you've described to me as, your most successful investment that not enough people have heard of, which is a company called Transmit. Tell me more about how that started, like when they came to you and why you invested initially.
So Transmit, the URL is Transmit.live. I think they go by Transmit.live. It is monetization for like live streaming and sports. We could talk a little bit about their trajectory in a sec. They were the first investment that Joe and I ever made shortly after we launched the fund in 2018. And we invested largely on the basis of the founder. I had known the founder and CEO, Seth Hitman, for a long time. He previously started and built a early DSP called Run that was acquired by Publicis. Very, very successful acquisition. And I had great respect for him. So, when Joe and I were just starting out and developing our thesis, a lot of our thesis initially came from what had made us successful relatively as angel investors previously, which was investing, in people we knew and ideas that we can get behind. And that was basically the idea behind Transmit. We knew Seth. We'd probably back him in, anything he did. And his vision was exciting. He was taking a step back after, being, involved in programmatic and looking at the video space. And his initial thesis was that, media was fragmenting and live streaming was going to fragment as well. And people would be watching video on every device and across every channel. So he envisioned a future where, live streaming would happen, not just on linear TV, but connected TV. And you would maybe watch it on X if X had the capability of, of running live streams. So, he sort of had this vision that the world was going to fragment around live video. And if that happens, there'd be the need for monetization solutions.
Okay, so in this case, their original supposition more or less came true, right? I mean, CTV became one of the biggest tailwinds for the entire digital advertising sector. I think this is still happening too. Like it's happened a ton over the past couple of years, but the transition of live events to streaming is still very much taking place. We've seen big deals with Amazon taking over Thursday Night Football, for example. Peacock did the first NFL playoff game exclusively on streaming. So this is an opportunity that has picked up a lot of speed in recent years and is still ballooning.
Yeah, it was not clear in 2018, though, that was going to happen. And again, this was sort of backing a founder and backing the vision of him and the team. What happened a couple of years later was CTV started to explode, like literally in kind of 2019, 2020. So when they raised their Series A in 2020, it was largely around this thesis that, it's time to go all in on CTV because, you had the pandemic bump, but you just saw the numbers of cord cutting and, live streaming on CTV going up. And they were like, this is the time we're going to go all in on CTV. So it wasn't necessarily a pivot, but it was like watching the market, seeing, where the real opportunity was and doubling down on the opportunity.
Not to spoil the end takeaway of the episode, but I remember when we first met, I asked you what are the key markers of a high performing investment or a company you would want to invest in. And you said it essentially comes down to thesis, timing, and people, I believe. And I think you see that very clearly with Transmit as all three of those things.
Yeah, very, very much, very much. So they executed from day one. And I think that one of the interesting things about Transmit, if I think back to it, and again, I've had the benefit of being in this company since 2018, was oftentimes it takes a business like a while to find product market fit, to get revenue, to get customers. They had that since day one. There's, a fair amount of public info out there because they had a big transaction a couple of years later. Like they grew revenue, 100% year over year, starting from 2018. So it was just like successful execution on product, successful execution on following the market, and ultimately revenue. Like they couldn't have nailed everything better.
So obviously timing and thesis are a big part of that, right? Like they went after the right opportunity at the right time. And as I said, that opportunity is still ballooning. I think CTV ads still feel too much like linear ads. Like there's been a lot of talk in digital for years about all the different cool things you would be able to do and the performance you'd be able to unleash with CTV ads with new formats and whatnot that aren't possible on linear. And I think that opportunity remains live. And, so they have plenty more progress to make. But I wanted to double down for people listening. Like you mentioned, Seth was a great person to back. And he had, formerly founded a DSP that had a great acquisition. So there's an obvious good founder indicator, right? Like VCs are known to love people who've done it before, especially in the same industry. You assume they can do it again. But was there anything else that drew you to Seth and that you've seen in his leadership or the leadership of his team that other people might be able to emulate?
Mm-hmm. I had the benefit of knowing Seth, not like well, like we weren't friends or anything like that, but I'd spent time with him over the years. Seth is, sure to borrow the term is he's a serious person. Like Seth builds, Seth executes. Seth is there to win, and I had great respect for him. Just like observing that trait over the years. The other thing about Seth is, he believes in letting the work kind of, tell the story. And again, I think there's a balance to be struck between, like letting the work tell the story and then ultimately telling the story from your own voice, i.e. a lot of stuff that you talk about. So, it's very much just a quiet builder. And I have great respect for that. And he built a very product and engineering oriented business. Transmit, even though it's a big business now, and again, we can talk about, with the latest with the company in a sec, it's still very, very product and engineering centric. And, again, if I think about our best investments, they all have basically all of them look like that over time.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how do you think then? I mean, I'm imagining that the way they got to 0 to 1 and then well beyond one is a combination of that, like the understanding of the space and the advantages of the technology slash product. Plus, then because Seth had been in the space and he knows a lot of people, and I'm sure his initial team did, like they must have had a huge advantage in terms of networking and the sort of
Yeah,
sales motion that gives ad tech companies juice in the beginning.
yeah, exactly that. The founding team, all came from ad tech, all built ad tech businesses before. So I think they had a, disproportionate advantage from the standpoint of they saw where the market was going. They had a clear vision of what to build. They knew who the initial customer segments were and like knew them because they just developed these networks over time and then just stepped on the gas. And
Mhm.
it was very successful. I mean, obviously every ad tech company, every business has ups and downs. And this is a little bit of a highlight reel in terms of me telling the story. But it was just a real focus on exploring this opportunity, this idea of the world fragmenting into, new and digital media channels, seeing the opportunity that was emerging with CTV, stepping on the gas before everybody else did, and just relentless execution. And then finally, in 2022, they received a majority investment from Liontree, who's very much in the sports and entertainment world, that valued the business at $350 million, and they're still going. 350 million is a sweet spot in terms of like deal size, for exits for M&A. And that was a majority investment. It wasn't necessarily an exit. So it's a company that's still got a lot of, I think, opportunity ahead.
Yeah, and I think for a company like that, like now that they've already achieved so much success, they have achieved that success in part because of what we said. It's thesis and timing. They went into CTV slash streaming technology at exactly the right time. Other companies that were later to the party have noticed that. And like every ad tech company and their mom is now getting into CTV. So I think part of marketing for them going forward will be defending that position and differentiating the legitimate innovations they've pursued in CTV from maybe some of the less substantiated entries that other companies are making into the space.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The challenge set evolves over time. You don't necessarily have the advantage of being first, for long.
And speaking of being early to CTV, the second company we wanted to talk about was tvScientific. So tell me how that came about.
This was in, I think, late 2019, early 2020. So again, a while back, I got a ping from another VC, Jason Fairchild, who I'd known of, less known, but known of, over the years. We're starting a new company and asked if we would take a look as a potential co-investor. So we did. Jason, I knew of his background. He's got a very unique, founding background. So he was a pioneer in both search, like literally the original search engine, which was called Overture, that pioneered the whole auction-based keyword model that Google ended up using and turning into the best business of all time. And he was also a programmatic pioneer with OpenX. So this is a guy that's like seen every major wave that we've had in ad tech and digital marketing since day one. So like very much admired his ability to, I think, see opportunity very, very early. So when I talked to Jason, again, this was 2020. So we had been in Transmit. We had been in a couple of companies that were focused on CTV. He came to us with an interesting thesis, which was that people are wrong about CTV. They're wrong about it from a couple of perspectives. Number one, they are underestimating the market size. Everybody back then was saying, the opportunity for CTV was this, $70 billion of, linear TV money that everybody talks about, of mostly like, large brand advertisers. There's probably 500 of them that make up that $70 billion of US ad spend. That was going to, be the market for CTV. And wow, a $70 billion market, that's a real market, real opportunity. That's why everybody was and continues to chase it. What Jason said was, yeah, that's cool, but I think CTV is inherently just another digital channel, just like search, just like programmatic. You can track, you can measure, you can optimize, you can report. So if we believe that, why isn't CTV a performance channel? And if you believe that CTV could be a performance channel, and by the way, this is accepted now. This was controversial back in 2019, 2020. Everybody thought it was like CTV will become TV. So he's basically like, if you believe that, why aren't the largest performance marketers, i.e. the big marketers on Google and Facebook that spend over $100 billion, why isn't that the TAM for CTV in addition to the $70 billion of TV dollars? So he's basically like, I think there's a real opportunity here to build something for performance marketers. And that's what I'm going to do. I think you overlay the, again, my core traits that I look for, which is, a very strong team, strong founder, big market opportunity, and a vision we can get behind, a vision that was very differentiated, a vision that was like, whoa, not too many people believe this, but if this guy's right, there's a real opportunity to build a big company here. So that was like a super compelling pitch. And a person that, had credibility because he had been in the middle of this market for a really long time.
Yeah. So again, team, thesis, timing. And again, I guess another interesting thing that's occurring to me as we talk about these two companies is, they were ahead of the ball. They anticipated where the market was going 4 to 6 years in advance because we see that their theses, which were presented to you initially in, I think, 2018 and 2020, are still very true. But also, and they've enjoyed a tremendous amount of growth on the basis of that correct thesis. But they still have a lot of headway to go which is a good thing because people do see now, they do talk about CTV as a full funnel performance channel, but that's still pretty controversial, actually. I mean, there are still a lot of people who mainly think of CTV, like traditional TV, as a branding channel. I mean, I told, Chris Reedy, whom we had on the show, who's a CRO at tvScientific, that I was talking to another client and they were talking about CTV. And they were like, yeah, I mean, you see like tvScientific trying to make like CTV a performance channel and like, that's never going to work. And like all that. So they're still fighting against a certain level of, if not consensus, there's still a significant portion of the market that doesn't believe in CTV as a performance channel and therefore as an appropriate place to reallocate those like search and social dollars, which again is great because that means there's still a lot of progress for them to make. There's still a market opportunity that hasn't been fully tapped.
Yeah. If you look at some of the best investments of all time, they were all non-consensus investments, every single one of them. That's what made them some of the best investments of all time, right? Because there was a real arbitrage there between, a very small number of people believing, the rest of the market not believing, and there being this opportunity to, to take the pie. So I love that. And it's a weird mental framing to have. And it's one of the things probably as an investor, I've gotten more comfortable with over time, which is when people don't believe, when people are telling me and telling the founder, this is crazy, this will never work, that gives me even more reason to like lean in a little bit because it's like, if the best bets are typically non-consensus bets, we need to think about it from that perspective. So back to tvScientific, they just like executed relentlessly. There's Business Insider sometimes does these walkthroughs of fundraising decks. during fundraising announcements. So if you look on Business Insider and you look for tvScientific, I think they had their most recent round deck, some of the highlights there. So they've got plenty of proof points that CTV is a performance medium, and there's a lot of performance marketers that are coming into CTV via tvScientific. So we invested in the seed. I think we're one of the first investors, if not first investor, in that round. They raised the Series A from Norwest and NBCU and Hearst. They just did a strategic round earlier this year with Martin Sorrell's firm leading the round, and they're continuing to just like step on the gas. So it's been a pretty incredible one to watch.
When founders come to you with opportunities, how do you vote on it? Like, I imagine like you and Joe need to be aligned. And is there anyone else involved in that? And like with these investments, were they slam dunks? And do you think the best investments tend to be no-brainers at the time? Or are there sometimes like doubts and it doesn't necessarily correlate that way from like the certainty when you make the investment to the performance?
No, it's a good set of questions. So I'll try to hit them all three. If I miss one of the three, let me know. So we have a team of four, the investment committee. So we all weigh in, we all debate, we all discuss, we all vote. Typically, if we get to an investment committee meeting, a lot of the work has been done, and have a thesis and conviction around a company. So it's team driven is number one. Number two, no. Particularly when it's at the earliest stage and, there aren't those proof points that we can look back and be like, oh, yes, of course, the world was going to move in the direction that Transmit believed or tvScientific believed. A lot of this is like, hey, again, the bet on the team, the bet on the vision. And we've been through, enough of these that we realize there's no guarantees. We realize that, the market could shift in a different direction. So at times, things look like a no-brainer. And then, they, over time, prove to not be no-brainers. So no, if I recall the initial conversations, and I went and I looked at my original memos on both of these companies, there were a lot of unknowns, but the known was the quality of the team and the market that they were building in, which again, there's some markets that we had a real thesis around. CTV was one of them.
So both of these founders, Seth and Jason, they both had like ad tech, digital advertising pedigrees. They had, when you talk about the quality of the founder, their quality was in their resumes, essentially in their experience. When you have a new founder, like let's say a 25-year-old walks in the door, how do you evaluate them without the benefit of those decades of experience?
It's a good point. And I think one of the reasons, perhaps, we've got a little bit of this like focus on founders that have been there before is it's one of those idiosyncratic markets, I think, ad tech is, where if you're in it, it becomes easier to sort of understand where the pitfalls are and where the opportunities are. And I think, again, that's why you see some of these second-time founders like Jason, like Seth, but also like Brian O'Kelly, like Jonah Goodhart, like Omar Tawakal come to this market because there's something about that institutional knowledge base that builds up that I think allows founders in this specific market to do it again and do it at a bigger level. Again, it's a weird, wonky thing. I'm still proving this thesis out, but I think there's something to it. We've invested in founders that were building in ad tech for the first time. Sebastian and Camillo from Memorable. Everybody's heard about Memorable. They had the acquisition by Reddit just a few weeks ago. They were MIT students and had developed this interesting model. And, we're like, this model can be applied to advertising. So the answer on, if it's a first-time founder or a founder that's, entering into this market for the first time is, do they have some particular domain expertise that we think has real application to this market? AI right now is one of those things that, we look for. That, a handful of the most recent AI investments are first-time founders that are deeply technical and are looking for a market to apply it to. So I would err on the side of, is there A, unique domain expertise, and then B, that general founder makeup that we look for in terms of, like build, sell, evidence of grit, evidence, that they're going to do this for the long term, sort of all those more qualitative things. You combine that with domain expertise, and that's, I think the makeup that we look for. there's no rules that, it's only like second time founders. I think we would, do ourselves and our backers a huge disservice by making that an investment thesis. But there are some funds that their whole investment thesis is we want second time founders. We want, repeat founders. Because again, there's something to that idea of knowing a space, coming back to it, having learned a lot of lessons.
We will get to the third example in just a moment, but how do you evaluate grit?
So it's twofold. It's number one, having done thousands of meetings, having, made over 80 investments, you start to develop a little bit of a pattern recognition that comes through in the conversations that you have with founders. It's not a perfect, but, this is a little bit of just like, I'm picking up on instincts, I'm picking up on signals, I'm picking up on nonverbals that come through in conversation is, number one. But then number two, there's some like classic, examples of things that people have done in their lives that, show these signals that they might have some of that founder makeup. Did they have a service job when they were younger? Have they been fired? Have they played sports? I think there's those things that sort of kind of come across that, you can check the box that, they've been through some level of adversity or they've, kind of had, themselves beat up a little bit that, show that level of grit and ability to overcome. But a lot of this is like, we pick up on patterns through spending time with people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I often think about that. I think, the sports thing is like a classic that like, I don't know. I played tennis growing up and I like simultaneously get it. And then I'm also like, but don't over index on it because it's like, obviously there are like many ways to be sort of competitive and super ambitious. I also think like kids nowadays who like come up through fancy schools, right? Like, I think there's a lot like those schools now get like shit on a lot because it's like, the woke stuff and like whatever. But it's like a lot of those kids, they've been like grinding since they were like 8 years old because it's like, like this was my sort of, middle class Long Island, like public school, just, being super competitive and super invested in academics from a young age. And I don't know. I think you can find a lot of like sickos and people who are like super driven that way. Another thing is like Bain and McKinsey always got people from my college who were like on the daily paper because it's like a 40-hour a week job. It's really similar to varsity athletics in the sense that it's like you're doing this thing that's super high intensity, super high commitment. That's a team that is like 20 to 40 hours a week on top of academics. I think if you can just find people who it's like, okay, the bulk of their resume is they've been doing some sort of job, right? Or they've been going to school. That's the main thing. What did they do on top of that? Like, is this someone who is like so driven, has so much energy that they had to go do like things B, C, and D in addition to thing A? That's one way that I think about it.
That's extremely well said. I agree completely. I try to spend time with the founders, and we have conversations. And that's the type of stuff that naturally comes up. And I don't think I even am conscious that we have those conversations. Like, I feel like the first time we met, I asked you some just like, hey, what do you like to do? Where'd you grow up? I think that's just my way. And, I don't necessarily have a list that I'm checking, but.
Yeah, for sure. I think maybe it's more intuitive for you, but no, that's true. You did ask me stuff like that. And I think, you get a more well-rounded understanding of someone than just, their stock answers. All right. So number 3, you wanted to talk about Kevel.
Yeah, Kevel was a different situation. So Kevel's a 12-year-old company, I think. They've been at this for a really long time. The original business was called AdZerk, and it was a low-cost ad serving alternative to Google. And they had been doing that for a really long time. I had known of James Avery, the CEO, for that time, just kind of coming up through the industry. And James hit me up again. This was probably in that 2019 period, and said, "Hey, we've been at this for a while. We only raised a little bit of money in the beginning. We see a real market opportunity ahead, and we're raising a Series A to go after it." What James told me was, hey, I think there's this opportunity emerging because of like 2 trends that I'm kind of seeing around the corner that I think are big. So number one, was at the time the rise of API first companies like Twilio and Stripe and Snowflake. Like that was a really big story in just B2B in general. Was kind of number one, and just the whole SaaS wave. And buyers were starting to get used to working with SaaS tools and API companies. And he's like, I think that's the future of ad tech in some ways. Was number one. And then, number two, he nailed the whole like, hey, I think this thing that's happening with Amazon and Walmart, i.e., this retail media wave, I think it's real. I think there's going to be more of it. But I think it's going to be not just retailers, but everyone. Like basically the whole Eric Sufra thesis of everything is an ad network. He was thinking about that quite early on. So basically, he's just like, look, we've built the core advertising infrastructure that anybody would, kind of need to, roll their own advertising business. Basically, he was like, I think the future is, vertical and retail media networks, number one. Number two, API driven companies. And, the future, person that is going to be building these types of businesses at retail media and vertical media networks is going to be a different type of customer. And they're going to be very used to working with SaaS tools and you're looking for APIs. So, basically his whole thesis was there's an opportunity for a new kind of business to help empower this wave of new advertising businesses that, he believed was happening. And that's the future of Kevel. This was like 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, this one in particular, I think is funny because it's just like now it just seems like the most obvious thing in the world. It's like commerce media is going to be this gigantic sector and like one of the two biggest tailwinds for the digital advertising industry. Every retailer and then even beyond retailers, companies like Uber or airlines and so on are going to be standing up media networks, and they're obviously going to need someone to help them do that. And Kevel has been part of that, but as you said, not at all obvious 5 years ago.
No, not obvious 5 years ago. And this was during also a time where there were fewer SaaS companies in ad tech. So my thinking was challenged on this one. It was like, hey, do we think our market can be like these other markets that are, exploding with, SaaS companies in B2B? And it's like, do we believe that there's an opportunity for all of these non-media companies to build advertising businesses? Building an advertising business is very complicated. It's complex and it's expensive. And that's the reason why, mostly like media companies since the beginning of time built advertising businesses, because it was just the natural evolution from offline to online. James's thesis was, let's make it less complex. Let's make it simple. Let's make it less costly. Let's basically empower people to do it using APIs rather than spending a year and hiring dozens of people, if not more, to like build all this stuff out and let 1,000 ad networks bloom. And again, it seems like so elegant in retrospect. Again, I'm an investor and I'm on Team Kevel, but none of this stuff was obvious back then. So just like Seth saying, hey, I think this market is fragmenting and people are going to be watching live sports on connected television and they're not going to watch it on NBC and they might be watching it on every device, was like not obvious in 2018. Jason telling me, hey, I think the market opportunity for CTV is so much bigger and everybody's wrong in 2019. And James saying, I think this whole wave of like ad networks need different tools and need a different type of partner in 2019. Again, it seems so obvious, but back then it really challenged thinking. And these are folks that had real expertise that saw around the corners and just nailed it from a timing and execution perspective.
Yeah, so to summarize again, I mean, I think it's team, thesis, timing. These three investments essentially picked up on what ended up being like the two major growth sectors over the past few years and still are for digital advertising, which are CTV and commerce media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, this was a good exercise because it kind of forced me to go back and think about and look through some of the kind of early thinking about this stuff. And again, it all seems so simple and linear, and it makes sense in retrospect. But I think you nailed it in terms of like what those common traits were. But the biggie was they just like saw around the corner with these markets that ahead of everyone, they were deep in and they believed. So that I think has also influenced how I think about our next set of investments, which is like, what are those next markets? What are those next opportunities that folks aren't necessarily thinking about right now, that I'm not thinking about right now, that, the founders are going to be the ones that actually like develop a thesis and build for. So that's really what this game ends up being.
Also, as we know, is the domain of venture capital. All three of these theses touched on opportunities that would be very large if the theses were correct, right? So, if live sports are going to move to streaming, that's going to be a huge monetization opportunity, right? If TV is actually a performance channel and can get performance advertising budgets, again, going to be huge. Same thing with if every retailer follows Amazon and Walmart into the ad network business. So that's the other thing, is just identifying a non-consensus trend as to where the market's going to shift, and also making sure that that opportunity is a massive one.
Yeah, well said. Said better than me, yet again.
Hardly. I'm merely following your lead, sir. All right. Well, we'll have to, we did make these founder stories seem extremely linear and simple with the benefit of hindsight. So we'll have to have some of them on, and they can tell us about how messy it was and how many sleepless nights they actually needed to put in to make it happen.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea, because that's the reality of this. What's the diagram or the drawing that people point to? It's so true. Like, what success looks like, the just like linear up and to the right. What success actually looks like, the squiggly up and down like roller coaster. Every founder, regardless of how their VC explains how it was also simple and and linear. We'll give you all those stories. So I think that's a great one. We should mark it down. But in the meantime, this is a fun conversation. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks a ton, Eric, and see you again next week.
Bye, everybody.